So, 14th of November, 2014, I made the decision to end my life. It had taken 21 years, 63 days, and 7 hours for my own little personal demon to get me. I was sitting on the end of my bed, in my hand. I had a letter from Centrelink, and it said that you've got to come in for a returning to work interview or we're going to stop your single parent pension. It didn't compute for me. I had a job. I wasn't getting paid very much, but I had a job. And the frustration started to build because I couldn't reconcile what I was holding in my hand, what I was reading, and why they would be doing this. And as it built, I threw the paper. And if you've ever thrown a piece of open paper, it doesn't really throw very well. And it wasn't particularly satisfying. And the frustration kept building. And I lashed out my legs. I kicked my drawers in front of my bed. It still wasn't enough. I picked up a deodorant can that was sitting on my chest of drawers and I threw it across the room and put a hole in my door that's still there to this day. I need to fix it before I move out. And in that moment, my demon got me, in my own voice. He finally managed to find a way to break through and sound completely and utterly logical. For 21 years, I'd fought undiagnosed PTSD. Been told that it was a genetic condition where I'd suffer depression and anxiety my whole life. And in that moment, he said to me, "What are you fighting for? Another day like this? Another week? Another month? Another year? The only way for this to end is for you to die." And what he was talking about, the only way for this to end, was waking up every single morning with a weight on my chest that felt like him sitting there laughing at me, telling me how he was going to destroy me that day. Except that it took a very different tone. It was, this is how you're going to destroy you today because you're a worthless piece of shit. And every night, going to bed, analysing every single word I said that day, every mannerism, every tone inflection, every action that I took, every tiny little mistake, and tearing shreds off me for it. It was 21 years of wondering if the day that I opened my door, that was the day that I was in crosshairs of a sniper. Now, I'll be honest with you, there was never a sniper. But when I was 12 years old, I had a moment of realization. I was being fingerprinted on the hood of a car, and it wasn't by the police, it was by a private security team. I just had my photograph taken with a Polaroid camera. And that moment of realization was they're doing this so that they can identify your body if it turns up in a ditch somewhere. My father was an investigative journalist. And in 91, 92, 93, he'd been hired by the Adelaide Advertiser to investigate the collapse of the State Bank of South Australia. What he found was there was $3.2 billion in missing funds. Those missing funds were taxpayer money because the state government underwrote the State Bank. He had a source, he published, and as you can appreciate, there were certain elements of the government and the bank that weren't particularly happy about that. So they took him to court to sue him to make him reveal his source, and he refused. And he refused for a number of years. So they decided to put pressure on him, and I'm the oldest son. And in true soprano style, they went for the oldest son. They tried to break into my bedroom window when I was 10. At 12, they tried to kidnap me from school. We lived with armed security guards. At one point, we were spirited out of Adelaide in a military-style convoy up the middle of 2 lanes of traffic. Think Ann Street in the Valley, driving up between the 2 lanes of traffic over the white lines. We came to a roadblock of sorts. There's a car broken down, and our security team screaming at us, "On the floor, on the floor, on the floor." And we're on the floor, hands over heads, because the fear is that we've hit an ambush. This is the biggest event, but the event that typifies the first 15 years of my life. And it's the event that led me to the 14th of November 2014. The demon was right. The only way for it to end was for me to die. So I stood up, went to go to the kitchen where I had enough tramadol to kill an elephant. And as I took a step to go out the door, I collapsed. From my neck down, I couldn't move. I lay on that floor for 57 minutes in a pool of my own tears, snot, and drool. It's probably the sexiest I've ever been in my life. I know it was 57 minutes because I received a text message from my ex just after I hit the ground. As I lay there on the floor, instead of convincing myself of all the reasons that I should live and that I wanted to live, I created 3 plans because my biggest fear at that particular point in time was trying to take my own life and screwing it up. Imagine having to live as a failure at suicide. My feelings started to come back in my arms and legs, but it was like after a good gym workout. My legs were wobbly, my arms were wobbly. So I sat on the end of my bed to wait for it feeling to come back. As I did so, I looked down and checked the text message, and it was a text message from my ex-wife. Things are a lot better these days, but they weren't good then. In fact, we weren't talking to each other in a particularly nice manner, and she quite simply said, "Oliver's left his hat at your place. Go and get it and take it to school." And it pissed me off. And I got up and I marched through the house. I tore the whole house apart looking for this hat. I couldn't find it. And I fired a text back and I've gone, "It's not here. Kid would lose his head if it wasn't screwed on. Go and check lost and found." And then I sat back down on my bed to wait for feeling and control to come back into my limbs so that I could actually go and kill myself. And it was in that moment that I realized that if I could get so upset about something so small, if I could get so upset about an inch, maybe I wasn't done here yet. See, the thing was, even though I'd made the decision to end my life, I'd reached a tipping point. That tipping point would be what would go on to actually be a catalyst and actually get me properly diagnosed and seek treatment. But there's a reason that I collapsed. And it wasn't divine intervention. It wasn't my father looking down on me. It was the inches in my life. It was every time the mum and dad looked at me and said, "Your name is Hellaby, and that means you never give up." It was every time that I faced a wall or a challenge and I said, "I'm not quitting." It was every time that I woke up feeling like my own skin was trying to suffocate me and I still got out of bed and then celebrated that victory. See, I don't know who said it, but somebody greater than me once said, "Don't try to do big things. Instead, try to do small things well." So in that moment, as I stood up to go and take my life, every small thing that I'd done to fight my demon stopped me. The weight of 21 years of fighting for every breath of air, of countering every negative thing my own head said about me, came to the fore in one go. And it stopped me from taking that action. And the interesting thing is that those inches add up in everything that you do in life. On the 30th of June 2017, we closed a financial year in my company that on that day in 2014 was circling the drain and just about facing bankruptcy. My company is now an international multi-million-dollar beast. We grew 450% in a 4-month window last year. But here's the thing. It wasn't what we did in the 4 months that made that happen. See, it took me 7 years to get to that point. Battling PTSD and depression, there were days where I couldn't work. There were days where getting out of bed was the only victory that I had that day, so I'd try and celebrate it. And the thing about that is even though it took me 5 years battling PTSD, 2 years not, every little thing that I did when I was battling, every time I got out of bed, every time that I didn't want to work, but I still went and replied to that email and forced myself to do it. Convinced myself that, hey, you know what, if you can respond to 2 emails, that's enough for today. And I just got those little things done and those little inches done. They built up. Because inches build up. 12 of them make a foot. 36 of them make a yard. And so it goes. And as much as it took me 7 years to get to this point where, to be honest, in the industry I'm in and the tools that I have, it probably would have taken a normal person too. But I still got here. And you see, the thing is, I got here because I reached a tipping point, and everybody sees the tipping point. Everybody sees that moment where it all suddenly starts to go, and they're like, wow, you're an overnight success. In fact, I'm very fortunate to mentor a couple of young entrepreneurs in Sydney, and one of them said to me one night, mate, you're nearly there. One of these days you're going to be an overnight success. And I went back and said, yeah, I'm not sure which one of the last 2,700 nights it was, but geez, it must have been good. And that's the thing. Everybody sees the tipping point, but you don't get to the tipping point without inches. One of my inches that I want to share with you tonight is one of my tools that, I'll be brutally honest with you, it bought me three years of life. For 12 months, I woke up every single morning and I wrote down 3 things that I was grateful for that day. And if I missed a day, I did 6 the next day. See, what I realized is that things like mental health, depression, PTSD, they modify your brain chemistry. Your brain chemistry actually determines your perception determines your reality. So if I could brute force my brain chemistry back on track, maybe I'd have half a chance. Of course, I didn't know I was battling PTSD and that there was a root cause that needed to be solved at that point. It's actually really easy to write 3 gratitudes every single morning for about 2 weeks. And then something starts to happen. You've done, you're grateful for your kids, for your parents, for everything they gave you, for your car, for your favorite new shirt, for the ice cream flavor that's come back in stock, even if it's only for a limited edition. And then you start to run out. So you start seeking stuff throughout your days. I remember one particular day I was out letterbox dropping. I was a real estate agent at the time. No, that wasn't the cause of my PTSD. Could have been, but it wasn't in this case. But I was out letterbox dropping, and I look up from dropping something in a letterbox, and there's a gap in the leaves and the trees, and there's perfect blue sky through it. And as my vision sort of changes focus, I see this leaf that's on the edge of this blue. And it's perfectly green. And I can see it in such detail that I can actually see the veins on the leaf. And I've gone, wow, how awesome is it that I live in a world that I can appreciate such detail. And my brain went, that's a gratitude for tomorrow, don't say anything more. Because that's what happens when you start to you brute force your brain, you recode your brain. Now, of course, if you don't solve the problem, it keeps coming back, and that's eventually what it did, because that moment happened before November 14. But bit by bit, inch by inch, those moments where I felt so down, but where I knew that I was heading to what I called the pit, and I got out and I walked for 30 minutes to an hour to induce the endorphins to come into my bloodstream, because the endorphins you generate from exercise counter the chemical reaction of depression in your brain. They directly cancel out those chemicals. It was an inch. Those times I write down the affirmations in a book, you know, I will, I am. As awkward as they feel, because they do. I hate actually doing that exercise, but that was an inch. We all get caught up in doing big things. But the big things take care of themselves if you do the inches well. Thank you very much.